minutes, maybe, John?
Yeah, it's one, a couple more minutes, yeah.
Seriously.
Okay. We'll keep it on time and on budget.
Jesus, part of paying for beers, that's great.
I got a P card.
Yeah, you can do anything. And alcohol, unfortunately.
Admin will want to know how many kilometers it is to the watering hole and back.
Oh, yeah. A little bit of that going on, but travel expensive. We'll win eventually.
Oh, you Bay and the, which watering hole are you talking about, Colin?
I don't know.
Oh, we're looking for beer.
Yeah.
Oh, I see, right.
No, but for our research last summer, Colin, went to all these lakes and have all this mileage, and some of it's just like gas receipts and stuff, that kind of stuff. So we couldn't put all the gas receipts. I said, well, we'll just take the total amount, and we'll just divide by the number of kilometers at 0.5, and we just submitted that as our expense.
Right.
And finance came back and said, I want to know how many kilometers you did every day.
And where you went.
And where you went.
All right, at 07:30 a.m. I departed Thompson Rivers University.
Exactly.
Okay, for those of you who know me, actually my watch is the Canadian time signal.
It's always faster than those, isn't it?
No, mine's a little bit, 1 more minute.
Oh.
Yeah, my watch says 1 more minute.
You're almost there on time. Okay, so today we have Ross Marchand giving his talk on his honors thesis, and of course the topic is up there. And what we're going to do is Ross is going to give about a 15-minute overview of this project, and at which time he'll stand up there and be questioned by the committee. And the committee, of course, is Brian Heisley, the supervisor, Jackie Sorensen, and Tom Piper. Each one of you will get about 10 minutes. Try to keep it 10 minutes. And then afterwards, you'll have a second round of maybe 5 minutes or so. And at the end of that time, then the audience can also ask questions of Ross. And after which, Ross and the audience, except for the committee and myself, will stay behind and talk about his mark, and then we'll call you back in. So that's the way we do it. So on that note, Ross, take it away.
Yay,
just so I know, John, am I going to be cut off after 15? Or?
No, just...
We'll try throwing things, that's all.
Sorry.
Am I going to get after 20, yes.
Enough sliders or whatever, you know.
Flames.
All right, well, first of all, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for showing up today. As John said, my name is Ross Marchand. I'm a fourth-year honors student. I did my honors thesis on feeding ecology and condition of rainbow trout in White Lake, BC. So, rainbow trout in British Columbia. They're a freshwater salmon species, as many of us know, and they're stocked into many of our freshwater lakes for the purpose of recreational fisheries. Pennask Lake rainbow trout strain are commonly stocked throughout the Kamloops interior, and we know that most of the time they're insectivorous, so they're known to feed mostly on insects, but they have been known to feed on fish after about 2 years of age. Freshwater sport fishing industry in British Columbia brings in hundreds of millions of dollars to the BC economy, indicating that these resources need to be managed effectively and efficiently to produce the best angling experience we can. So why should we worry about feeding ecology? Why is it important to us? Well, intuitively speaking, most rainbow trout are heavily dependent on what they eat to grow, reproduce, and produce a productive fishery. There's also an apparent lack of knowledge from month to month to month on what Pennask Lake rainbow trout are actually eating. So this fills a niche in terms of what that specific strain is eating in the interior, and it also gives us an idea of how it's doing in terms of competition with invasive goldfish. So my research location is obviously White Lake, British Columbia, which is just right here between the two middle arms of Shuswap Lake. It's about an hour east of Kamloops. Here's a closer up. So why did I choose to study White Lake? Well, it's one of the most popular recreational fishing destinations in British Columbia in terms of angler days. It also brings significant economic importance to the Shuswap region. There's significant political pressure to ensure that this lake is a prosperous recreational fishery. And recently there's been reports from local anglers there's been a decline in the quality of the fishery in the lake, ranging from reports of poor condition, the robustness of the fish itself, or just less big fish in the lake. And obviously the anglers are very critical of that problem right now. So the possible causes of the decline, obviously goldfish is a source of a lot of finger pointing, but there's also other reasons that could be at play as well. Too much natural recruitment, stocking management, or just plain overfishing where anglers are getting too good at catching the big fish out of the lake. So my research objectives were to examine and increase the understanding of rainbow trout feeding ecology in White Lake and determine if there's variation in what they're eating. I want to know if they're only eating on certain prey items and if those kind of align with what they should be eating according to previous literature. I also want to determine the health and condition of rainbow trout in White Lake to see if there is a real problem in terms of condition factor. And also I want to look at that condition and lengths and weights and compare those to previous stock assessment done in 2000 to see if there is really a big difference into previous years. A secondary objective was to examine benthic convertebrate community composition in White Lake in conjunction with Flinroe and Colin Bailey's research. And I also used that information to compare benthic availability to what the trout are actually feeding on. Theoretically, trout are known as opportunistic feeders and feeding on what is available at that time. So that gives us a window into kind of what they're eating in terms of availability. So my field methodology, stomachs were collected by local anglers and given to us or Flinroe for analysis. A lot of stomachs were either put in freezers or they were put in 95% ethanol for preservation. I didn't analyze all the stomachs due to poor preservation techniques, I'll call them. And as you can see, some of the samples, this is what we got in the end. And this was a good sample, what we collected. So, but even though some of those samples I still decided to analyze just because they're really important in the temporal scale of what I was trying to do. There was a lack of fish in the middle months, and so I kind of had to take what I could get from those months to see what they were eating. One of the problems we ran into was a lot of the angler collections didn't provide us with good length weight data on the fish, so Flinroe was gracious enough to let me come out and help gillnet White Lake. I believe it was a sinking 10-meter gillnet with Jimmy Arner there, set in the northeast corner of the lake. In total, we collected about 72 fish, was the tally that I got. We analyzed them all for length and weight data, but I only chose 20 of the fish to actually get stomach analysis on because of time limitations. And we also biased towards the larger fish in terms of the stomachs we took, for the reason being, I wanted to compare with what the anglers were getting in terms of the bigger fish in White Lake. So we opened up the stomachs in the lab. Contents were counted under a dissecting microscope in terms of abundance. So essentially I just counted exactly what was in the stomach in terms of taxonomic groups. So for example, lots of dragonflies in this fish, amphipods in this guy. I chose to maintain my analysis from the pyloric CK up to the edge of the esophagus, just to maintain kind of a standardized procedure as to what I was analyzing. And I also didn't want to analyze contents that were too digested to identify, and most of those contents are in the main stomach portion. Beyond pyloric CK, they tend to get quite digested. So before I could do any statistical analysis, I needed to get a biomass, and I decided to also do a caloric intake of what the fish were eating. So to get to get biomass of what the fish were eating, I used length weight regressions from previous literature. I also got caloric values of certain prey categories from previous literature as well. So as far as my statistical analysis, I did chi-square goodness of fit test for proportion by weight and proportion by caloric intake data to compare what they were eating between months and within months. I also did a Crystal-Wallace analysis with a Mad-Whitney post hoc to analyze differences in total biomass and total energy intake between months. I also used a Munson plots to determine feeding strategy and relative prey importance as well. In terms of size structure and condition analysis, I used Fulton's condition factor index to determine the relative or the plumpness of the fish and determine if the condition was in good. I used a Mad-Whitney U test on the individual Fulton's K between 2000 and 2014 to see if those condition factors were any different between 2000 and 2014. I also did the same test, Mad-Whitney U, on length and weight data to compare size between 2000 and 2014, just in terms of lengths and weights to see if there's more bigger fish in the lake or less. So I've broken down my results into 3 categories, just to make things clear. I did the diet analysis and composition, the feeding strategy, and size structure and condition. So these are the results of the chi-square analysis in kind of a graphical form. And this is generally what we would expect from Pennask rainbow trout. and rainbow trout in general. Quite a diversity in terms of what they're eating both within months and between months. So for example, in May, you can see that dragonflies, amphipods, and chironomid pupae are quite important. Chironomid pupae, probably because there was quite a large hatch. And from month to month, that changes, and different prey items will become more significantly important, obviously, throughout the year. So this gives us an idea that, obviously, they're not just feeding on one prey item. They do have some kind of diversity of what they are eating. And that's kind of expected based on healthy rainbow trout populations that I saw in the literature. In terms of total biomass, it was kind of interesting when I ran a crustal Wallace analysis. It actually said there was no significant difference in total biomass that was eaten, but I had kind of a deeper look, and obviously we do see a difference here. In May, there's quite a big abundance of what they're eating due to all the insect hatches. The chironomid pupae weigh, some of the huge masses that I got from those, I think, contribute to that weight. We see kind of a decrease in June and July, and also that's indicative, I think, of the sample size that we got. Fishing is less successful in those months in general because the water is warmer and the fish aren't feeding as well. So in terms of the caloric value, it's much the same as for biomass. There's quite a variation between months and within months in terms of where fish are getting their caloric values from. We can kind of see that cladocerans seem to be taking up quite a bit, and that's interesting because adult fish are not supposed to get most of their nutrition from cladocerans. They're supposed to switch their diets to more adult insects, so I'm wondering if they're utilizing cladocerans because there's nothing else available in those middle months, particularly in July, August, and September. Whereas in May, you kind of see, which is the heyday month, I call it, where there's quite a different abundance of all sorts of insects, and they have more opportunity for feeding. So in terms of our results for what they're getting throughout the year in terms of their caloric intake, there is a significant difference. June and July were much lower in terms of what they're getting in terms of nutrition, and that's more of an expected result based on the graph that I see here. Probably their nutrition is going down because those prey items aren't as good nutritionally in the middle months, but cladocerans traditionally don't give a lot of good values, whereas chironomid pupae, a lot of them will produce quite a bit of calories in the diet. So that covers diet analysis and composition. So feeding strategy, things get a little more complicated. I used the Amundsen plots, and I didn't use all of their aspects. I found through the literature that this method can be used to find out quite a few aspects on rainbow trout feeding ecology or just fish feeding ecology in general. But I chose to focus on their feeding strategy and dominant versus prey, or dominant versus rare items. And basically, the Amundsen plot simply plots frequency of occurrence versus prey-specific abundance here. Frequency of occurrence is just how often a prey item appears in a diet. So say fish in May, we caught 20, 15 had cladocerans, we'd say it was a 75% frequency of occurrence. Whereas prey-specific abundance is actually a measure of how much of that proportional biomass is taken up by one certain taxa. So this really says the amount, and this really says how often they are eating them. So you get kind of dominant prey categories up here because they occur a lot, and they're also having quite a bit of them. Down here, they appear quite rarely according to frequency of occurrence, and they're not eating them very much, so they're not very important prey items. So there's a lot of noise here, but I'll try and go through kind of systematically if I can. It's interesting, in May there seems to be quite a bit of rare prey items that appear, and I think that's because of the opportunistic feeding patterns that these trout show. If something comes along and it looks juicy, they will definitely try and eat it. And there's still some dominant players, chironomid pupae over here. Cladocerans also appear a lot, but amphipods are significantly abundant in May. As you go throughout the month, or throughout the months, you kind of see more of a generalized strategy in June. There seems to be less prey items present, and they seem to be feeding more on those items that are probably available. July and August and September, I kind of criticized because of a low sample size. But you can see in July, they seem to not really have a lot of options beside chironomid pupae, probably occasional hatch. And cladocerans, they seem to be really turning onto those in those months. And same with over here. August, I found a couple of fish in the August months, and I couldn't find out if they were goldfish or not. They were too digested. But you definitely see a change in the diets through here. And then back in November, bigger sample size again, so we have more variety. That's important to note here. And we kind of see similar to May a bit. Amphipods are important, cladocerans are somewhat important, and then you get a few rare items that pop up in the diet. So that covers feeding strategy. So on to size structure and condition, I actually really didn't find a significant difference between the Fulton's condition factor between 2000 and 2014. So there's no indication to say that the fish are really tanking in terms of the condition factor, I would say, based on this. And the length weight regression I also ran, and it shows about the same thing. They're not in great condition, but there's no reason to suggest that they're in terribly poor condition. But things change when you come to lengths and weights. There seems to be quite an abundance of small fish in White Lake in 2014 compared to 2000. Just got my beam here. So this is a histogram for mass, and you can see there's quite a few fish in the 0 to 0.2 in 2014. And if you really focus on the gray, you can kind of see the histogram goes down as you come across, whereas in 2000 it was a bit more balanced, and it was more larger fish in terms of 2000 there. In terms of length, there's also quite an abundance of very small fish here. And the histogram seems to be more pushing to the left side for smaller fish. And those were both significant, according to the manual EU test, saying that fish are significantly smaller in terms of length and weight, but not in condition in the 2 years. So that covers size structure and condition. So my discussion and conclusions, I'm just going to go back through my objectives. So I wanted to increase and examine the feeding ecology of White Lake and find out their monthly feeding variation. And obviously I found quite a bit of variation in what they're eating. And that variation goes down in the middle months. It seems like they are feeding more on cladocerans and kind of really focusing on those items throughout the middle of the months, whereas in May, they obviously have those big hatches. But it shows again that they're transitional feeding to seemingly what's available. And that's why I think this graph is kind of interesting. It shows what it shows here is proportion by number for benthic availability for benthic invertebrates. So this is what was found in the benthic samples. And it also shows those same items and how often they occur in the stomachs of the rainbow trout. And there seems to be quite a similarity. I didn't do a statistical analysis on this, but I don't know about you, but those look pretty similar to me. Something is going on here. And that's expected, again, based on their ecology of eating what's available. So my second and kind of third objectives together determine the health and condition of the trout in White Lake, and also determine if that condition and lengths and weights have gone down in previous years. And there's no reasonable evidence here to suggest that they are really tanking in terms of their condition, as I said before. But it is interesting that there seems to be less big fish in White Lake based on the lengths and weights. Whether it could be to stocking standards, I noticed there was quite a jump in the number of small fish that were stocked in 2013. Maybe a lot of those fish were caught in a gill net. But maybe there's just not a lot of big fish in that lake period, and there's something that needs to be done to increase the size of those fish. But not in terms of conditioning, which is interesting because I expected to see a really, really poor condition, and I don't get that indication here. So I just have a few acknowledgements. I'd like to thank Brian Henry for obviously all his advice and for coming out in the gill net, even though he was coughing up a storm that day. I know it was really hard. Jackie and Tom for being my committee members. Nancy Flood and Louis Goslin provided some statistical advice throughout the process. Obviously, the guys at Flood Row were great for letting me come out and join them, especially Jim for coming out that day and helping or making the gill net happen, essentially. And Andrew Clausen and Steve Miracle for their advice and for allowing me to come out and do that with them. And also Colin Bailey for giving me those White Lake benthic samples to analyze and assisting me in analyzing those. I know it took quite a bit of time. It's amazing how long those benthic samples take to look through. And also the members of the White Lake community, because most importantly, if they don't contribute these fish, regardless of the condition they were in, this project doesn't happen. So I have them to thank for that. Let the fire range begin, I guess.
Thank you, Ross. Pretty well on time, but that's pretty good. So now we have rounds of questions, and I guess we'll start with Tom first.
Okay. So this is sort of a methodology question. It will speak to my lack of knowledge of inspecting or understanding what's being eaten by a fish, but I'm wondering, is there any literature out there that suggests how looking at stomach contents impacts your ability to assess what the fish are eating? I'm just thinking something's may digest faster, for example.
Yes, yeah, and that's a good point. From what I've seen, it's the most efficient and it's actually the best way to analyze feeding ecology of trout in most literature. And to come back to the digestion of most of the prey contents, you're right, cladocerans will digest faster than a big dragonfly, for example. But that's why you restrict your analysis to the very beginning of the stomach and the internal of the stomach, and it's supposed to be much better that way, and sometimes you can't get the specific identification to genus or to family, but most of the time with cladocerans, which obviously are the zooplankton that digest the fastest, we don't usually go down past order anyway, so it really doesn't make a difference. We can tell if it's a cladoceran or not, it doesn't really matter, and the ones that we really want to know kind of further down in their taxonomy, we can tell because they don't digest as fast. So yeah, there is some error there, and obviously some literature says to that, but if you keep your analysis to above the pyloric cecae and into the esophagus, it's much better than going down further, because things get quite digested, and you do run into those problems there.
So what proportion of the samples would you say you can't identify, or can you identify?
I guess it's impossible to say. It's based on the digestion of those. I would say zooplankton probably go through the system quicker and are probably lost faster. There's so many of them, though, that it's hard to know for sure. But I would say that we get, as long as we standardize between the fish and we don't analyze certain parts of the stomach in some fish and not in the others, we do get that proportion correct because they're still being digested. So.
Another question I had was dealing with, this is sort of theoretical, because I've always kind of wondered about this. So the goldfish were considered an invasive, in paper you called them an invasive species, so I know what did you call them? Something different.
Introduced.
A
Non-native?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but rainbow trout aren't in a lot of these lakes, too.
Yeah.
So, can you sort of discuss the difference between when is something an invasive species versus not? And I'm not saying rainbow trout are bad, I'm just curious about your thoughts on this, because I've always wondered.
That's an interesting question. That's a whole different kettle of fish, I guess.
Rubbing off.
No, but yeah, and that's a controversy in itself. Is should we be stocking our fishless lakes with rainbow trout for the purposes of recreational fishing? And it's almost an ethical perspective in terms of what we decide is important. And obviously, rainbow trout, economically speaking, are the most popular fish in British Columbia for fishing. But why doesn't a goldfish have the same right to live in a lake like that? And I think the answer is because rainbow trout are native to BC, whereas goldfish are native to Asia. So I think that they're still an in-province fish, and probably that means it's okay to introduce them to some of these lakes as long as we can get a control and handle on them. I think it's fine. But yeah, I agree. There is some ethical views in there. That's a different side of things. Should we be stocking fishless lakes with rainbow trout? Because they are known to impact amphibian populations. And hammer benthic invertebrates, as Colin was kind of analyzing in his research. So yeah, there is some ethics. But I think rainbow trout are native to BC, and therefore, as long as we contain it and we do it in an ethical fashion, it's probably better than introducing goldfish. Because we also don't know a lot about goldfish ecology and how they're going to interact with our native ecosystems, whereas rainbow trout are more well studied in terms of those interactions.
Oh, yes.
So the other thing I would like you sort of, if you can tie a little bit tighter, you were talking about condition of the fishery, the condition of the fish, and you spent a lot of time also discussing what they were eating. Can you, for me, tie together how eating habits bridge to the fish condition?
Yep, no, that's a good question. When I look in the literature, it's kind of, you have to be careful because you're looking at a Pennask strain of rainbow trout versus a regular rainbow trout. And they have certain expectation of what they should be eating to get the best nutrition. And that's where I mentioned, I think it was, I have to go back. Here, they seem to be getting quite a few calories from cladocerans, from zooplankton, in all months, not just in the middle months. And that, according to the literature, they shouldn't be getting most of their nutrition from cladocerans. They should be getting it from aquatic insects, especially the bigger fish. Smaller fish are more known to eat zooplankton than the bigger fish. So if these large, big fish in White Lake are feeding on cladocerans, that indicates maybe they don't have enough of something else, so they're choosing to feed on those because that's what's there. It also might be because there's less hatches in the middle of the month. I think May is a good example here. Cladocerans are quite low, so you can tell they're getting good feed in that month, and that's probably when their nutrition is the highest because of that. But yeah, I think it's based on what we know of Pennask Lake rainbow trout too. There's not a huge amount of knowledge in terms of what they eat. So it's interesting to look and see what this strain is eating in one of our BC lakes, because there's not an extensive study like this done that I can see that says what does this strain of fish eat in those months. And if they were eating all podosirines and you don't see any amphipods or any dragonflies or any damselflies, I would expect a poor condition. But these fish seem to be at least eating on a fair amount of different items. Whether that, it's hard to tie it together for sure, but it gives us a base knowledge of what this species could be eating and compare it to other lakes, maybe what the same strain is eating and what their kind of condition is.
So can you have a fish that's in good condition but doesn't grow as much? I'm sort of wondering if that eating habit could play into their
Yeah.
they qualify for good condition but they're smaller, or is that not related?
Well, that's the interesting part of the study is if you think if they aren't getting enough food, their condition should be lower, is what I think. But they don't seem to be in terrible condition, and that means that they probably are getting the food that they need. But maybe we're just overstocking the lake, or maybe there's just too much natural recruitment is the problem, not actually what they're feeding on. Because sometimes you point to, obviously, if they're in poor condition, like the fisherman mentioned, they're not getting enough food. Well, I would say that they seem to have access to quite a bit of food, and their condition doesn't seem to be terrible. Maybe there's just not a lot of big fish in the lake because we're flooding into smaller fish. And it would be interesting to come back in maybe 2 or 3 years and see again if this condition factor starts to go down and kind of have a more continuous monitoring program, because I just have 2000 and 2014. I don't know if maybe there was a big jump in condition factor in there somewhere either. I'm looking just historically at what fishermen kind of saw in the lake in 2000 versus what they see today, and there doesn't seem to be a big difference in the condition factor.
You also mentioned that one possibility is that the anglers are naturally selecting out the big fish from breeding. So what are your thoughts on that? Is that a reasonable, do you think that's a reasonable cause if it's also a heavily stocked lake?
Yeah. Well, it's one of the top angling lakes in BC for angler hours, so there's a lot of pressure on the lake, specifically early in the year. And yeah, those fishermen could be getting really good at just finding the spots and getting those fish out of the lake. And the lake is struggling to recoup those bigger fish. And it may just be a selection process out of the population. I think that is a good reason. But I think I think it's more natural recruitment myself in terms of what's going on there. And I think that needs to be limited, and that's probably what the real situation is. Because I think there's a lot of lakes where big fish are selected out of the population, and they don't start to struggle because of that as long as they're re-up. So I don't think that's the real reason. I think it's more other factors, but it could be kind of piling it on a bit more and just assisting the situation to become worse and just seeing those large fish leaving the lake.
Okay, I'll pause for now.
Okay.
Since you're on this slide, I did have a question about the amphipods. So do you have an ecological explanation as to why they're totally absent through the summer months?
Absent in these months?
Mm-hmm.
No, I actually...
They would be larger than the zooplankton. You'd think that they would pick them.
Would pick them up. And some species of Hyalella, which was the species that we found in White Lake, tend to crawl along the bottom of the lake and not make migrations to the top. And that's probably why we don't see a lot of amphipods in these months. Maybe, I don't have a huge amount of knowledge on amphipod ecology, but from what I looked at, they do make migrations up and down, and maybe they stop those migrations in the middle months. And it's something to do with their individual biology is why we're not seeing them. But I don't have a solid explanation of why we don't see amphipods, because they are some of the most nutritious food for fish, right? So that's why it's interesting that they're not seen here.
They're easy pickings.
And also, what about sample size too? We don't consider that here. I only analyzed July 3, 4, 3 fish. So that's also another picture as to why we might not be seeing them. It's just because I didn't select fish, or the fishermen were catching those fish that had amphipods, right? So I think a small sample size is also critical there, because it's interesting that the months with bigger sample sizes did see those big increases in amphipods. So I would partially blame that. Sorry?
They go down conflicts.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of thought about it. Oh, I bet she's looking for sample size. Yeah.
All right. Can you go to, I think the last slide within your results, and it shows your, oh, back up, there we go. So your length class is there.
Yeah.
So you made a fairly big conclusion in your thesis that essentially fish were shorter and lighter in 2014 based on this comparison.
Yeah.
And you mentioned in your presentation, what I see is that they may have actually just been missing certain size classes in the 2000 sample. So
Yeah.
can you statistically make that conclusion? And what, if you had unlimited time, I suppose, what would you have done in terms of providing a little better picture of this, a more ideal analysis here?
In 2000 or just in
For
2000?
both, in terms of comparison.
Well, in 2000, we only got 28 fish in the gill net, so that's not a big sample to draw off of either. But yeah, there seems to be an absent, is that what you're referring to there? Kind of
Mhm.
absent of small length classes?
But even in 2000, it seems to be the smallest fish there is 200 to 250.
Yeah.
Right? So that's obviously going to bias your mean in terms of
Yeah.
the statistical comparison that you did.
Yeah. Also, this assessment was done in November, and the fish are usually stocked in the spring, from the stocking history that I have. So they do have time to grow, and so maybe those small size fish have kind of migrated out. This 200 millimeters is about 20 centimeters, and it's realistic that they can grow that much in a year. Maybe growing conditions were better in 2000, so fish were getting out of these small length classes quicker, whereas in 2014, for some reason, they seem to be stuck in this smaller category and they don't seem to be eating as much, or there's just much more smaller fish in White Lake in 2000. If you go to the stocking history, it's kind of interesting. I kind of showed down here, a lot of the fish stocked kind of before the 2000 stock assessment, a lot of smaller numbers here, and they're also a lot bigger, whereas in 2014, you see that 2013 is fry stocked, and there also is a lot more numbers of smaller fish there too. So that might be an explanation as to why there's a lot more fish. But for this one, I think that they probably are growing out of that size category possibly. And so that's why we see still that gap, but not as significant as 2000.
Is it possible just not, they're there and you're just not catching them?
Yeah, the gill nets tend to catch bigger fish, right? So that's always a problem with gill netting in literature, is they tend to, bigger fish tend to get captured, smaller fish can swim through. So we might just not be capturing those less than 200 millimeter fish in total. So. But it gives us an idea, I think, still, this histogram, even in the bigger categories, it says that there seems to be a lot more bigger fish, and those ones can avoid the gill net in these years. So yeah, I agree, there's something going on with the smaller age classes. But with the bigger age classes, we see the same story. There seems to be more in 2000, so there seems to be something going on there based on that.
Would you have collected age information, for example? Maybe look at size of age to have a better comparison?
Yeah, that would probably be my suggestion for the next time if I was to do this again. I think Flinroe did take a length or an age on the 2014 fish. I just looked at length and weight. I just wanted to know, was there bigger fish in White Lake in 2014 than 2000? So I wasn't looking at age, but yeah, going back, I probably would have done more of an age comparison to see. And maybe Jimmy, if he wants to ask me about that, has more information as what the ages were caught in 2014. In 2000, I know there was kind of a range. I saw 3+ years, I saw quite small fish, so there's quite a range of sizes caught in 2000. So.
Right?
No, objections.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. We actually have lots of time. Lots of time.
Time.
I'm very well.
Put me in, coach.
Taking apart your graphs here, go. So I want to go to another graph and look at your Fulton's cake.
This one.
There we go. So, as we've discussed, even a little bit of a reduction in Fulton's cake can be meaningful ecologically, which you do explain well in your thesis. So, I see quite a bit of variation in 2000. Do you think that if you could tighten that up a little bit, there were a few influential observations I noticed on your regression graph there. Could that have changed the story a little bit?
Yeah, I think the sample size I didn't put on here, obviously, in 2014, it was 72 versus a third of the sample size. So you get much bigger standard error in those months. So yeah, I think, but there's nothing I can do about that. That was what was given based on the data. But yeah, I think the more fish you catch, the better for your sample, right? As we saw in Mighty Lake, better sample size means you get more accurate results. So yeah, I would have liked more fish caught in 2000 to do this comparison. But Fulton's K is still above what a lot of other lakes are, and it's not a terrible Fulton's K. I think it's just under 1.2. So it indicates that fish aren't in terrible condition in both years. even if there is a standard error that's quite wide in 2000 there. So, and the length weight regression, I do actually have it here. Include it in this one. They weren't too significantly different. I think the slope was 2.91 and 2.8, so not a lot of difference there. I didn't statistically test these, obviously, but the criticism of length weight regressions, they tend to average out size classes too, so they're not the best measure to use, I don't think, on these samples. I think Bolt's case probably a better indication, but the two of them combined kind of say, tell a story at least, and give us some idea of what's going on.
They at least graphically show a nice spread of your
Yes.
fish there, and there's a nice higher square curling.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. There's some power there. I think in 2000 there was actually less power, so it's more indicative, I think, in 2014 what's happening.
Thanks, Ross.
Oh, I'm okay. Okay. First of all, I just want to start by saying great job, a lot of work. I know that you can call them both, but a lot of work in the lab there, and I really appreciate it. You've done a great job. You got a great body of work here, maybe a bit wordy, but I really like it. So well done, but you'll see that later. So a few questions. Jackie jumped right in there with some graphs. Let's continue that trend. I love it. So let's go to slide 17, please.
Can you give me a better idea of what that slide is?
Oh, yeah, it was figure 5 from your thesis, total biomass per month.
Yeah. That's calories.
Error bars from hell. Yeah.
Error bars. Hell.
There.
Yeah, the error
okay.
bars from hell.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Look at
so
that sucker.
in that diagram, you're saying your p-value is 0.086,
Uh-huh.
so not really significant.
No, it's interesting, isn't it?
Well, yes. Now, when I look at that, the first thing I want to do is take out August and rerun
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
Did you try that?
No, I did not run it. But if you actually, I'm sorry, I'm going to leave you there for a second. Here's the mean ranks.
That's not my slide.
Ah.
Oh!
So here's the mean ranks for biomass, and that's why I kind of picked it apart too. You can see in terms of the medians, you actually see the biggest drop in May, June, July. August is actually fairly high compared to the other ones, but I don't like these ones no matter what because of the small sample size. I listen more to these ones. I think there is probably a biological drop. Everybody's from Hamilton, there we are. I think that ecologically speaking, we do see less capture in that month because fish probably aren't feeding as much. And that means their total biomass should be lower, and that's where these ones come in. I think, yeah, you're right, that is really quite a ridiculous figure, and probably your best off to just take it out. I decided to leave it in just to get the full picture, but yeah, you're right. I would expect a drop in the middle summer months, and then maybe an increase in November. I would have loved to have gotten some December samples too, but obviously that didn't happen.
But you could work around that, because if you don't want to throw any data, you leave that in there, but if that had been significant, that had been 0.04, you probably would have then jumped in and done some man Whitneys on any
Exactly, yeah.
So couldn't you just do that anyway? Couldn't you compare May to June
Mhm.
or May to July? Look at a few of those comparisons, because those to me look significant. And it may be that
Exactly.
you can say, based on the biomass, you can say there were some significant differences, even though the overall analysis
Overall, yeah, that's the.
could have been insignificant purely because of lack of
It's-
power and the high variability with your small
Yeah.
sample size.
It's funny, this came up because I was actually doing a practice last couple of days with my mom, and she said, "You said it's not significant. That sure looks significant to me."
Yeah.
And they said, you know, that makes a lot of sense. But the Christopher Wallace analysis, there's a lot of criticism of it because it really tends to not find significant difference when there actually is significant difference. It's non-parametric, but it also groups a lot of variables into one equation. So yeah, 0.086, that's not exactly really not significant. So I could go back in and do individual man Whitneys to see if there's a big difference. But really, I'm very careful with these months just because of the small sample size anyway. I think that it's really hard to come to conclusions based on finding 4, 3, and 3 fish.
Yeah.
So
Why did you use non-parametric?
I got no distribution of normality in terms of the biomass that each fish was eating in. Like each individual fish ate a certain amount of biomass, and those distributions were never normal distributions. So there's no way you can use the parametric test on that.
Did you try any transformations on them to try to normalize
An arcsine transformation, no.
or something like that?
No. I decided to stay with, based on the sample size as well. 4, 3, and 4. That's why this isn't really my favorite graph of the whole thesis, to be honest.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. I don't like it as much. I don't think it gives us a really good idea of what's going on. It gives us an idea of something going on in the middle. But no, I didn't try an arc-sine transformation if that's what you're kind of signaling towards. But I figured because we have such small sample sizes here, look at the error bars, they're not as significant with May, June. Even the smaller months here, not that bad actually. It's just that August month really seems to be messing things up and really kind of playing with my picture here that I'd love to say, but it's hard to get any data from that month. If you just take it out though, you see kind of that swing going down.
Yeah. No, I agree with your mom. There's something there.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, that doesn't look not statistic.
Now, talking about, this is biomass, but you also talked a lot about energy. I really like that, by the way. The simple thing that is abundance, biomass is better, energy seems even better yet, calories, so I love that you did that. You mentioned that the intake, you said there were lower energy intakes in June and July, indicating available energy may have been lower. But are there any other interpretations that you can think of for that?
The prey value is not as robust in terms of the caloric values that they're giving to the fish, is what I would probably indicate.
Is there a completely different way of looking at that from a more fish-centric point of view?
Size selective predation.
No, I'm thinking more of activity.
Well, the activity goes down in these months, so they're not as hungry. They're not, with warmer temperatures, ecologically fish, or rainbow trout specifically, like that cold water, and that's when they feed the most. So they're not feeding in these months, so they're probably just not getting the calories from those months.
I agree. I think you might want to stick that in the thesis.
Okay. Is it not in there?
It's not.
Okay.
Yes, anyway, I agree with you totally.
We have more.
We'll take away and add at the same time.
Yeah, they're going down here.
Yeah. Okay, talking more about food behavior of prey, does that make any difference?
Yeah.
In terms of availability for predation?
For biomass, especially the chironomid pupae, they hatch on the bottom, and I think in May, you see quite a significant hatch from chironomid pupae, and they really have a heyday on those when they come out. Also anisopterans, you see those, they also hatch in the same kind of months based on literature. And amphipods, I think amphipods personally are probably quite significant in these months. We just have too small a sample size. So the fish in this month really do feed on those opportunistic prey that are available. Dragonfly nymphs are very large compared to cladocerans. We only see cladocerans here, very small. So a fish isn't going to bother with that when they see these nice big chironomid pupae floating right up in the middle of their fair game. And same with dragonflies as well.
So if the fish are going for deeper water, offshore waters, it makes sense there's cladocerans. What about the anisoptera, the dragonflies? How do they emerge out of the lake? Because I know that a chironomid is going to float up right in the middle of the water column. What do dragonflies do?
It's very similar. It's very similar to how a chironomid pupae would emerge. They're just a lot bigger, and it probably is a lot slower. They don't move as fast from what I saw. And I think the reason you see, there's not nearly as many of them as chironomid pupae, but in terms of biomass, they make up quite a bit more, so a fish doesn't have to eat very much of them. And they are quite slow at moving through the water. Chironomid pupae, I think, are faster.
But don't dragonflies have to crawl out on a hard
like
substrate
vegetation or
to
something
crawl
like
over their
that?
skin?
Yeah. But
So you said, so do they crawl on the bottom to the shore and up, or do they go up in the middle and sideways, or how are the fish getting them?
From my knowledge of anisopterans, I don't know a huge amount, but what I did read is they grab a substrate, like some vegetation or something, and they crawl up it, and then they find the highest point and they leave it. And they can travel through the middle of the water column, from what I've seen. And it depends on species specific too, I think. I didn't go down to family level, so that kind of limits my analysis in terms of what they were, like ecologically, how they were moving through the column. But similar to chironomid pupae, they do rise through the column, and they are opportunistic on those prey, because they're very large, obviously, they're the biggest prey that the fish in this lake feed on. Noticeably absent, I would say, are damselflies as well. I didn't actually look at damselflies because they were less significant, but I think the dragonflies are probably the most indicative that they're coming up similar to chironomid pupae, and they're feeding heavily on those.
Have one more?
Yes.
Okay. Switching gears totally now, something's happening around the world really, is that science budgets are being slashed, and so we see more and more reliance on something called citizen science. where average people collect data and they provide them to researchers. And to me, you've got a nice example of citizen science here, in that it's just the public fishers that are providing data. Did it work?
You know,
And how would you improve the collection of data in future? And do you think this is a good idea?
well, first of all, most of the samples were quite good. What I would probably do in the future is maybe develop like a form that kind of gave a descriptive, very easy to read form that says, this is what we want you to collect, and make it very clear for the citizens and what they are collecting. And maybe, what about giving them some kind of incentive to collect fish, like they get maybe an increased quota or something to collect that data, and to collect it correctly too, because you're right, some of the data in May we got kind of lengths that were like 14 inches. Well, it's hard to do a length weight regression on 14 inches because, well, the guy might have just looked at it and said, oh, it looks about 14 inches, right? So, yeah, I would say that make sure they put it in the right units, and it's actually easier. I think people in inches, aren't as familiar with it. Millimeters are quite easy to calculate, and so maybe we encourage those people to collect that data in that way. But I think giving them some kind of like an introductory lesson almost. If you were going to do a large-scale study, maybe teach those people how to collect the data, and I don't think overwhelm them either. Just make sure you collect what you need in that too, and you make sure I would actually stress the importance to these people that the better data you collect, the more important the information is to us, and the better conclusions we can get out of that data. So, preservation of some of these fish was a concern too, but really overall, I didn't analyze it if it was just terribly digested, but most of the stomachs I was able to get phytocerins out of and know what they were and get in abundance, so it didn't change anything too much. In terms of families, I just didn't collect the families if I could, but I don't think it's very hard to include a manual in something that says this is how you inject the stomach with certain 95% ethanol, or just make sure you throw it in the freezer immediately. But,
Do you think it's worthwhile just better preparation of the public?
yeah, preparation public, and maybe a lesson or two would be good. On a large-scale study, this is quite a small-scale study, but definitely encourage these people, because they care about their lake and they want to see it better, so you can tell them that the best way that you can help us is by giving us the best information you can, and by taking our advice in terms of what to go after. So.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have round two.
Okay. I have 2 questions for you. You talked about this value of 3 for a slope, which is trophy-sized fish.
Yeah.
Can you go to that? You had it up there a little while ago. And you say that they do not have a value of 3. Can you definitively state that based upon what you've presented in the thesis?
No, I would say no. It's hard to, well, what it does give you is an idea of how terribly they're doing, but it's really hard to say. These fish are only slightly skinny. 2.91 is only just below 3, so they're pretty much, they might be around 3, and we're only collecting, I would say, 72 fish out of the hundreds of thousands of fish in the lake. So.
But if you were going to increase your confidence in that it is actually below 3, what would you have to look at?
Increase your confidence to be.
So you say it's 2.91, but is it really 2.91? What could it possibly, in terms of a range of, what is a 2.91 telling you in that image?
It's just below 3, just below prime.
What exactly is 2.91?
It's less than average.
Okay, so you have length and you have weight,
Yeah,
and you have an equation describing the relationship,
yeah.
and you have 10.881, and you have another value 2.91. What is that in that graph?
The 2.91.
Yeah, what is that? On that,
It's,
what's
it's the slope.
the slope? Okay.
Slope, sorry.
So you're describing a slope.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to say it was less than 3, what would that slope, what would you need to do to say it really is less than 3? In your thesis, I find you fairly definitive saying it's a value, but you don't describe statistically that it is actually less than 3. So what would you have to do if you wanted to do that?
Increase your sample size as well, probably.
What would you have to look at when you create the slope? What else is generated when you create the slope?
Residuals.
So you could look at residuals, and if you had big residuals, what would that result in?
Bigger variation, or
And
bigger
that-
error.